The Boeing 737 MAX was intended to the modernization of Boeing's highly successful 737 line, but it has been Medine flight in January 2016. The Boeing, despite its relative success, the 737 MAX has appeared incapable of catching a single break. As a result of the following mass in 2019, the aircraft will be grounded. Finally appeared to be the comeback. However, instead of being plagued by a new set of issues which could threaten the success of the line going forward, and here's what Boeing might do. Crazy, be responsible for more than you think, so what? How does Boeing fare in light of these new problems? Fault, and can they do anything to solve the issue with the 737 MAX? Let's find out. Between October 29, 2018 and March 10, 2019, saw two fatal accidents for Boeing for Lion Air Flight 610, which was flown by a regional route in Indonesia, and for Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, heading to the international airport of Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya from the Bull International Ethiopian Airport. At both times, they were traveling in a Boeing 737 MAX, and times all passengers on board sadly lost their lives. Investigations into both situations demonstrated how comparable both accidents were, and it was revealed that the 737 MAX had one big problem: the MCAS, or maneuvering, the MCAS characteristics. The system for augmentation is a feature developed by Boeing for the 737 MAX to help stabilize the flight by basically emulating some characters ICS of the earlier 737 next-generation aircrafts on paper. This was a great idea, as it would have saved the extra cost of preparing pilots for airlines that had a desire to make the upgrade. But it didn't quite work out as planned. As you can see, during the 737 MAX flight tests, it was discovered that the aircraft's nose tended to be raised during specific. This was because of the position, and engines that are larger in size in the Boeing, despite this issue, is the maximum, requested that the description be removed of MCAS from the aircraft manual, which left pilots unaware of the system. This proved to be a fatal mistake that would lead to two fatal crashes, and it didn't get any better because during the investigations, it was also found that there were a host of other issues with the 737 MAX which were underreported or not reported at all. This kind of negligent behavior from Boeing would be a common theme, at least for this video, as a result of their grave error. Boeing 737 MAX jets were grounded between December 2020 and March 2021. 2019, Boeing had to pay a whopping $2.5 billion in concealment settlements. Vital information from regulators, though the 737 MAX has only begun flying again. Again in 2021, after corrections were made to the flight control of the aircraft laws. However, the 737 MAX's grand return to the skies has been riddled with yet more issues emerged. With the 737 MAX was finally cleared to fly again. The world was in the midst of a pandemic, and the aviation industry was in a period of uncertainty. Fortunately, the time when there was demand for airlines' aircraft has been on a steady increase. But this is where the issue lies. For the 737 MAX, you see, after they're preparing for the COVID-19 pandemic in 2019, the year following, a large number of orders for the 737 MAX had to be paused or canceled for obvious reasons. Now a lot. Some of those orders have been renewed, but Boeing haven't been able to deliver their aircrafts on time, resulting in a recent decline in the value of their stock, as well as leaving them with a massive backlog. These delays have been caused by supply chain issues as one of Boeing's key suppliers. Spirit AeroSystems have discovered two significant issues with the 737 MAX's fuselage, which they controlled the manufacture of. And these problems are, no joke, the problem lies in the first of these, with the fitting of the vertical stabilizer or fin to the top rear of the. There are typically 8 fittings in the fuselage between the two parts of the Boeing jets, but 2 of them, in this instance, were produced in a different way than required details. This problem appears to affects all the 737s, apart from the MAX 9 and MAX 10, which is coming as far back as 2019. Possible repairs. Our estimates range from $100,000 to $150,000 for each aircraft. During the second and arguably more concerning issue is the body's presence of snowman-shaped holes. the pressure bulkhead of the AFT, just in case you didn't know what snowman holes are. They are essentially a drilling flaw, where two holes are drilled together in a way that leaves a snowman shape typically as a result of a positional error. The AFT pressure bulkhead is basically what helps the aircraft maintain pressure while gliding through the air because of the internal pressure in aircraft. The AFT pressure bulkhead is what prevents their deconstruction into pieces in the sky. SPI have revealed that they use multiple suppliers for the AFT pressure bulkhead, so not all 737 it is expected that fuselages will be affected. Boeing may also have an issue with the trunnion pins in the landing gear of the 737 MAX, but this is yet to be confirmed recently. An Alaska Airlines 737 MAX had a collapsed landing gear, which was initially blamed on a hard landing, but proved to be incorrect by the flight data recorder, so it might be worth examining on other aircraft. But despite these issues, the FAA have actually not revoked the 737 MAX's clearance to fly, as they don't deem these issues to be a huge safety risk at this point. However, the same problems have been discovered to affecting some of Boeing's other aircraft inspired by the 737 Next Generation series design, such as the maritime surveillance aircraft, the P-8 Alpha Poseidon, even if the fuselage Boeing still faces problems despite the fixes. With finding a way to ramp up the production of the 737 MAX as demand for today, the aircraft continues to rise. The 737 has received over 4,000 orders. MAX, and it's going to be almost impossible for Boeing to complete them with the current available capacity. The timing on their R assembly line couldn't be much worse, as Boeing's biggest rival Airbus are ramping up production for their A320 product line as a result of skyrocketing demand. All of these problems could hinder the success of the 737 MAX. But the biggest threat to Boeing seems to be Boeing themselves, especially because of the way they've outsourced important production processes. You see, outsourcing of various production processes in the aviation industry is fairly prevalent, because no one can really do it all, but it appears that Boeing has gone into overdrive with their outsourcing policies, and today they aren't even responsible for the manufacturing of as much as 70% of their aircraft. Parts their major rivals Airbus, however, we are accountable for producing a higher percentage of their aircraft parts. For example, they have 20 manufacturing facilities in comparison to Boeing's Poultry 3. This hands-off approach by Boeing towards some production procedures appeared to stem from their merger with McDonnell Douglas in 1997. After both companies merged, the headquarters was moved from their manufacturing hub in Seattle to Chicago. That change took the engineers and technical professionals away from the center and substitute them for profit-seeking executives. The result of this was the new management deciding to outsource or totally halt processes that either weren't profitable or deemed not to be a component of the fundamental operations. While this isn't a bad idea, Boeing could have easily handled a lot more of the operations they dropped. And today, one of the operations they dropped has become Spirit Aeros, is the company itself. That's responsible for producing and also fumbling on the 737 MAX's fuselage. They also manufacture fuselages for Airbus and other aircraft manufacturers, and Boeing have even tried to acquire them back in the past without success. However, the biggest problem with outsourcing a lot of the production process is that quality often suffers. Boeing and more people become involved is now experiencing this firsthand. So what can Boeing do? Well, there are a fair Boeing can do a few things to make the possibilities for the 737 MAX. But the goal ought to be to find a means of really ramp up production in 2022 alone. Airbus delivered 516 of the A320 aircrafts, contrasted with 357 737 MAXes from Boeing. So in current levels of production, the A320 is miles clear of the 737 MAX. On the other hand, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, as Boeing announced that new production line would be open for the 737 MAX in their massive factory at Washington. They are housed in the Everett facility, largest factory in the entire world, and the production of the 747 and 787 have been either moved or discontinued. This will free up a lot of space. Extra space could be used to focus on the latest variants of the 737 MAX, like the new MAX 10 or the MAX 8200. Lastly, Boeing ought to endeavor to increase the amount of production procedures that they carry out internally as these. If they had been prevented, delays had their specialists working on the following pressure bulkhead rather than subcontractors of a subcontractor. The biggest fear for Boeing with the 737 MAX is canceled. A lot has been invested into the aircraft, and the potential for these delays to carriers consider switching to the following available aircraft. But the thing is, there is a possibility that the fuselage defects affected more aircraft than expected. And this could be a devastating blow for this 737 MAX's prospects. However, it's highly unlikely that this is true, and we could see the problem resolved within a few months. Despite all of its issues, the 737 MAX is still a fantastically efficient plane, and it continues to be in high demand. And with the single-aisle market looking at a projected growth of up to 50% within the 737 MAX could do well in 20 years. Placed to take full advantage, however, Airbus are a formidable opponent, and these days they seem to be prepared for whatever Boeing might bring. What should we do? You think about the prospects of the 737 MAX. Do you think it would remain popular after all of these delays? Airbus, will it make the most of their logistics issue? Please share your thoughts with us in the comments below.